Welcome back to the Stepping Bricks YouTube channel. This week we have a good friend and also a property investor and a property lawyer specialized in will, testaments, and everything you need to know that you are afraid of thinking about it. Hello, so today we have Joy Savill. Hi Joy, how you doing?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Good. So we have a lot of students, both in the academy, in the club, but also general public. They ask questions about, how to protect your business when you're not here anymore. And this is a question actually they get asked a lot of times, but most of the people don't want to think about it because it scares them.
Yeah, that's quite common. A lot of people just don't do it, so they don't think about it.
Yeah. So talking about property, but in general about business, most people want to build a portfolio, build wealth, but then they forget they're not immortal. So what happens? What happens when somebody's not in this world anymore?
So your wealth, and whether that be your bits and pieces, i.e., what the legal world called your chattels, so your furniture and stuff like that, and your money, shares, businesses, all pass under your will or under the intestacy rules. So if you don't have a will, they pass under the intestacy rules and they cannot be circumvented. So they go to people often that you wouldn't necessarily leave them to. So, for instance, if you're not married and you're with a life partner and you have children, or you don't have children and you have parents or brothers and sisters, everything will go to them and nothing will go to your life partner. They're not entitled under the intestacy rules. So it's imperative that you have a will. In most circumstances, there are very few where I'd say you shouldn't need a will.
Okay, so in the case of property, there's a lot of mention about wills versus trusts. Can you explain?
So trusts are lifetime things, and you put your it's a wrapper you wrap your properties in lifetime trust. They can be difficult to get hold of. Trust hasn't been set up correctly. So if you don't want that property ever again, and you don't want to do anything with it, you don't want to lend on it, it can be put on in a trust. Lenders are not fans of trusts; they don't like them. Um, and if you're a beneficiary under a trust, that might pass under the intestacy rules if it's not been set up. So a will is what happens when you're dead. So you're sitting on the cloud. You died yesterday, and you're sitting on the cloud, and you're looking down. What are they doing that you
Mhm.
wish they weren't doing? While you're not dead, you can change your will. A trust is in place and stays in place.
Mhm.
So you only can write a will with what you've got today. You can't pretend you've got something tomorrow. You write with what you've got today. We can't see the future, and we don't know when day zero will be.
Mm-hmm. That's true. That's true. So we have a lot of questions from our students, and they are very interesting, especially because they refer sometimes to limited companies. So investors generally they can either buy properties in their own name, or in a limited company, or in a different structure. It could be LLP, could be hybrid structure, etc. Now the main question we have is, how do you protect your business if you have it in a limited company? Is it better to put a will in place and take care of the limited company, or just leave it as it is and then they will take care of the shareholders?
It's a bit of both. You should always have a will, um, because you don't know who's going to die with you. You know, if you're all on a family holiday and the plane drops out of the
Sure.
sky, so you should always have a will. The other thing you should make sure you sort out is a shareholders agreement, which is not the cheapest document, but it will ensure that it crosses every I and dots every T should you die, and what happens to the shares. And you can do that by using different classes of alphabet shares so that you can pay down your director's account, which will make your shares worth less and your estate worth less. Inheritance tax is the biggie there. And inheritance tax isn't avoided in death, it's avoided in life. You've got to, it's never too early to start. You've got to start with it in mind, start with the end in mind.
In the case you mentioned before, family trip, everybody dies. But let's keep it even simple. Let's say you have one director, one shareholder in a limited company, and they have, I don't know, 2-3 millions of assets, £2 million of assets. So let's make an example. The person dies. What happens to the limited company and to the assets?
So the limited company is a separate legal entity, so it remains in place. The assets remain in place, and the shares in the company pass under the deceased's will or under the intestacy rules. So, and the shares will be worth the value of the asset. So, in a £2-3 million situation, you're going to have inheritance tax to pay at 40% on everything over 325,000.
Okay, so even if it's in a limited company, in this case.
Yeah, you're not paying value on the property, you're paying the value of the shares. But of course, if there's property in a company, the shares are then worth more.
Of course. So the best way to structure the business in that way would be for the person to add the family members into as a shareholders, right?
Yeah.
In that case, there is no inheritance tax as long as they live.
As long as they live, there will be inheritance tax on that person's value of the shares. So sometimes, if you speak to your accountant, they will set you up A and B shares, say, and your shares are A, and their value is income only, so you get nothing other except the income. And the B shares are capital and growth, so that's in your family's name. So when your shares are valued, they're worth much less, and therefore, if there's not a great deal of income, they're not worth very much, and the family get inheritance tax is not easy to avoid. It's often a case of making it lower or making sure it's dealt with prior to death.
Yeah, and we always promote reducing it rather than avoiding it, because that could get you into trouble.
Yeah, and it's no good. It's no good if you're, I've had clients who are up in the 80s and they go, I don't want to pay inheritance tax. Well, it's too late.
Yeah.
You can give anything away, but you've got to live 7 years. And when you live 7 years, prior to that, it's something called a potentially exempt transfer. So it's only exempt at the end of 7 years. There are reliefs as you go down, taper reliefs, but it's still, and you can't give everything away without getting lifetime gain charges and things like that. So
that's right.
It really needs to be checked out with an accountant, or an expert to check on lifetime charges. Because if you put something in a trust in life, there might be an entry charge.
Yeah. So you mentioned the 7-year rule. Let's explain to the audience what the 7 year is for.
So 7 years, if I gave you £1 million today and I died tomorrow, that money would be put back into my estate and would be charged inheritance tax on it.
Correct.
If I died any time in the next 7 years, it would be put back. It wouldn't all be put back. So after 2 years, you start to get a taper relief. So after 2 years, only a certain percentage will be put back. And I look at the percentages every time because I don't do it often enough. It's quite a rare thing to be doing in a general estate. So I'd always check the percentages. But they start and they end up less and less and less. I might give you the £1 million today to buy an asset which might be worth 3 million in a year. What you need to remember, and this is one of the ways of paying less inheritance tax, if it's worth 3 million in a year and you die, only the million goes back into your estate. So you won't be paying inheritance tax on the whole amount.
Okay.
And I've done that with great effect on land that's having options put on it, which is worth agricultural today and tomorrow with an option on it, or when the planning comes through, it's worth several £1 million. That's the way to do that. So you've given the land away, and the person you've given it to, in this case, in one of the cases I'm thinking of, it was grandchildren, they gave the option.
So in the most common scenario where, for example, we have family members, elderly parents, they want to give away either property or money, then they must live 7 years so that the kids don't pay inheritance tax on that. And whatever they do with the asset, then if they grow the assets, if they grow the portfolio thanks to that gift, then that's not taxable in terms of inheritance tax. Okay.
The other thing to remember is that the average person who owns a house and is married or has been married and is now a widow, not a divorcee, they will get all their deceased spouses' allowances. So if your mum and dad are just general, they've got a nice house, few grand in the bank, their inheritance tax limit, as long as they were both, when they both die, as long as they were both married when they die, if you're not divorced, then they will have about £1 million of the nil rate band to use. So it's fairly safe for lots of people. But if you get sort of into the south where you've got fairly modest houses selling for over £1 million, then you need to be really aware of it then.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, the kids have to sell the asset to pay for inheritance tax.
Yes.
That's a scenario that we see quite a lot, especially in areas of the UK where prices are very high.
Inheritance tax has to be paid before you can get a grant. So not only before you can get the grant of probate or letters of administration, you have to pay the inheritance tax.
Okay.
If you've got a few £100,000 bill to pay inheritance tax and there is no cash, it's a house, it's increasingly difficult to do that. You have to borrow the money to pay the inheritance tax.
That's a curse rather than a blessing.
Yeah, it can be a real curse, yes. And also remember, you're dealing with the real problems with you're grieving, you've lost your family. It's not that simple. Life's difficult when you lose a parent, and it's usually a parent, and then suddenly you've got to find all this money, which they would be horrified if they knew you.
Yeah. You know what, Joy? This is one of the things. I mean, you being a lawyer, you know exactly how these things work. But talking about just out of the box, I believe that it's better for the parents to gift the assets to their kids or next of kin, whatever, before they die, so they can see what they do with it.
I agree, absolutely. The only problem, which is usually their main source of wealth, is their house. They can't give it away and still live in it.
That's correct.
Avoid inheritance tax, because that's called a gift reservation.
Yes.
And one of the most horrifying things I say to people in this situation is, tell your parents, they're most horrified about, is tell your parents to take an equity release out and give you the money.
Yes.
And they go, but we've spent ages not to have a mortgage. But if you've got a debt to set against your estate, you don't pay inheritance tax on it.
That's very interesting, and this is a point that I really wanted to get to. So I'm clarifying for the audience, but this is brilliant. You have the asset, so the parents have the asset. It's worth £2 million. So you go over the threshold, then it's mortgage free. Then if the parents die, then you have to pay the inheritance tax on the
400,000 in that
exactly.
case.
So it is a 40% above the £1 million. So 400,000 in this case. If, like you said, they will put a mortgage on, release equity, and give you the £1 million, for example, then they die, and what happens?
£1 million paid back out of their estate, and you don't pay any inheritance.
That's it. Job done.
Yeah. Okay. Except, of course, they've given the money away. You've got the 7-year rule in that.
That's right.
But
In that case, okay. In that
You
case,
also might be, you might then have £5 million worth of assets from that
yes,
£1 million. So, you know, that 5-year rule might not make any difference. That 7-year rule might not make any difference to you.
correct. So I'm going to read one of the questions from our students, and the student is asking if you have assets in the UK and then you have other assets abroad in another country, do you need to have two separate wills?
Yes, you do. But so if you've got assets in the UK, you make a UK will and you leave your assets to anybody in the world. It can go to anybody anywhere in the world, but it will only apply to your UK assets.
Okay.
If you have assets elsewhere in the world, you need to make a will in that jurisdiction, and you need to speak to an expert in that jurisdiction. What you also need to make sure of is that they both know about each other, because if they don't, it's so easy to inadvertently rescind a will, and you don't want to do that. So your will should both wills should contain a clause that says there is no intention to revoke the will in the UK or in the foreign country. If I was drafting a UK will, I would be saying all wills formally revoked with the exception of those made in France, Italy, wherever, you know. And I assume, but I can't carry everybody's intestacy rules from all the countries in the world in my head, the will in the other country would need to say the same.
Sounds good. So Joy, I have one of the questions that been probably is a basic question, but I have had doubts in my mind. For example, let's say I have a will and then something happens to me. How do I know that the person I deposited the will with, you know, the lawyer, is going to contact my family and do all the rest? How do they know they are died?
They don't unless your family tell them. Usually you will get a copy of your will, which you should tell people who's done it, where it is, how to get hold of the person. If the will is with you, so some people don't store their wills in with lawyers, they keep them at home. Then that's more likely that the executors will be family members, so they all have to get together and do that. If they can come to a lawyer like me and say, I've got a will that's appointed this person as executor, and I will take the will off and do everything. Or you can do what's called personal application. But again, the people who are named in the will are the only people who can do it.
Okay.
So if you've written a will and named a solicitor, then they must do it. If you've written a will and named Fred and Mavis next door, then they must do it.
It's interesting because let's say, for example, the kids discover that they didn't get anything in the will and they're very angry. They're very upset. So they know there is a will, but they say there's no will. How can you protect that?
By not keeping it at home.
But that's my point.
By lodging it with, and that's the difficult thing.
Yeah.
Because if there were kids and they all ganged up and did it, then it would be very hard not to do that. Unless somebody, I mean, I used to have an undertaker many moons ago who used to ring me up and say, I think I've got one of yours. But it's not always the case, you know. And so that's the difficult thing. The way around that is to make sure that you don't keep everything. You know, there will be information that maybe they can't do it without, and they need to find a will. But they will, if they put in for a grant of a letters of administration and they swear that there is no will, then they are guilty of perjury.
True. Yes.
Because it's you swear an affidavit.
But that's done intentionally.
It is a potential situation, yes.
But how many times it happens there is unintentional? For example, I don't know if my parents have a will or not. You know, I'm just giving an example. So if they die, then how do I know that there's a will? How do I know that there was a will? How many times it happens in your experience that people find out there was a will way after?
I've got, I mean, I've worked at solicitors that have been established for many, many years, and you go into the wills room, and there are wills in there that are often dated at the beginning of the last century.
Yeah.
And you go, well, they must be dead by now. So, you know, if you made a will in 1907, you're fairly certain to be dead by, you know,
Yeah.
by the year 2000, although not all of you, not granted, but rarely. So, but nobody ever throws them away.
Mhm.
But that's right, you don't know if they're there. There is a system, but it isn't mandatory, called certainty, which allows you to register the will, but that's a paid for service.
That's correct. That's correct. And on that note, I think thank you very much for this, because it's an incredible topic that most people overlook, and we need to understand it before it's too late. So Joy, thank you so much for this. You will be in the space, so if people want to get in touch with you, we put the contact details in the comments below. If you guys want to ask any more questions, you want more YouTube videos on this topic, please comment below and then subscribe, because that's important. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks, Joy. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.